evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another program with Jim O'Connell here at Education Matters. If you're watching live, it's Tuesday, the 11th of June at 6 p.m. The call-in number is 640-3091. And as always, you're very welcome, regardless of your opinion or thoughts. You're always welcome. I don't think we've ever had a caller whose opinions we didn't listen to, etc. So please feel free to do that. There's a lot going on as ever. I mean, the big news, I guess, is that there was a new budget passed last night at the automatic meeting, and that budget did go over what Mayor Craig had proposed in the tax cap budget, and so I think some people will feel that they have been very brave, and I think perhaps they have been brave in doing the right thing. However, they won't be surprised to hear from me that to simply tread water is still just treading water. But I am grateful that we've gotten at least enough money to be able to negotiate in good faith with our teachers. But before going to that, which I will do, I guess. This is the last week of school, and so a lot of exciting things are happening for kids all through the school system. Thursday is the last day of school, so we'll be seeing kids out and about and in the neighbourhoods, which is great. I worry. I think lots of teachers in the district and educators worry about the kids, the 14, or if you add the homeschoolers and charter school kids and religious school kids, etc., the 15 or 16,000 kids in the city of Manchester who will be out of school. And for some of them, and actually quite a reasonably small minority, it will be a time of perhaps travel and vacation, etc. And then for another minority on the other end of the spectrum, it'll be a time of want and need, because many of their needs are covered by the school district. I think it's also important to note that a lot of the things that go on that there are a lot of things that go on in the summer in the school district, and even though regular school is over, there are still lots of programs and special programs and activities of one kind or another going on. I'd like to just take this opportunity to say that it's a time, I always, there was a couple of things happened when I was a kid, which is a long time ago now, and there were a couple of summers where I went to quite a small school. My high school had about 450 kids in it, and on a couple of the summers, so that's, what is that, like less than 100 kids per class or something. On a couple of summers, we came back to school after summer with somebody missing who had on both these occasions, it was someone who had an accident, a kid who had an accident during the summer, which is just so sad. And so it's always stayed with me that I wish that people would have a very safe summer and have a lot of fun, because in the end, that's what childhood should be about, right? Having said that, Dr. Vargas, our previous superintendent, was a strong advocate for summer reading programs. And there is a summer reading program that you can read more on at mansd.org. But educators know that when kids leave school, regardless of the grade, whether they're at the very beginning of elementary school, where it's critically important actually, right up through the end of high school, that there's a significant drop-off that happens, sort of a step thing that happens in kids' education between the end of school year in mid-June and when they go back to school in the first week of September. And many kids suffer from this step down thing that happens because it takes weeks and weeks and weeks sometimes to get back to where you were. Maybe the whole month of September into October before you can bring the class of kids you have back to where they were just at the end of June, let alone bring them through the next grade that they have moved to. And so one of the ways of avoiding that step down is for parents, and this is the duty of parents, an obligation of parents, is to make sure that their kids are, the simple version would be reading for the summer, but they now they can read for pleasure, find whatever it is that might interest them and have them read that. I'm a big advocate of books and reading, so good. If for some reason, and I don't accept there are many reasons why that can't be so, the very least that kids need to be in is in a stimulating, thought-provoking, enriched environment. The opposite of which would be to sit around doing nothing and just bake on a couch for 2 months. And the fact is, it doesn't require large amounts of money in order to do this. There are lots of programs available for kids. There are lots of, the library is there. One can get a library card, and if you only visited there every 2 weeks, it's 4 trips during the summertime. And so the resources are there. Parents just need to take it seriously and do something about it. And I don't mean to preach to people, but it's a very simple concept. If all of us want our kids to, I guess, ultimately just be happy, but to be successful in life, and so the main way of being successful in life is to go to school and to learn, and to be successful in school. Taking some of these steps are really important. So the kids who will do some reading during the summer will be better prepared in September to take on the workload that their class is going to take on. And sadly, we saw last year or the year before with Dr. Vargas where there was a pushback from some parents who viewed the idea of the school district suggesting that that kids read during the summer, and the fact that the high school kids were given a book that they should read and have read by the end of the summer, and then there were recommendations for kids in elementary school and middle school. And some people took it as a sort of a big brother thing that, who do they think they are, the school district, telling my kids, they have to read, and my child hates reading, which is, again, something a parent should be working on, not resisting. But why are they forcing my kids to do that? And it's entirely the wrong attitude, because it ought to be, first of all, people should be grateful that a superintendent and a school district and an administration cares enough about kids that wants them to succeed. Secondly, it's just basic common sense. It's not that hard. There's no reason for the resistance. No one's making anybody do anything. There's no kid gets sat in the corner on the first week of September because he or she didn't read a book, or no one gets shouted at or admonished or embarrassed or whatever. It's none of that. The fact is, the way the kid, your child, will be embarrassed or whatever internally by the fact that when they get back to school in September, if they have spent the summer doing no reading and no preparatory work at all, preparatory work is the wrong word, simply reading and keeping their mind stimulated is enough to have them so they're in learning mode when they get to September. And for those of you who are big sports advocates, you all know that when kids, your kids, even kids in high school and on into college, but certainly at elementary school. I know at the league that I've been involved in for many years, Manchester North Soccer League, we have kids there in the fall program, and you put teams together and pick any age you want. The programs there run from about 4 years old through to 18, and the same is true for the other leagues in the city. And this applies to baseball and lacrosse and everything else. During that 8 weeks of the season, or 10 weeks, whatever it is, it's transformative for the kids. The kids are clueless. not to be unkind, but even if they've played for 5 or 6 years and they're in eighth grade, and they come in the fall to, pick up their game and start again, most of them, they just don't. The muscle memory's not there. They're not as fit as they ought to be, and really, as coaches, people take great delight in seeing the improvement over the 8 or 10 weeks of the season, and you can see it if you're a grandmother or a grandfather, a parent, and you see your little Johnny or Mary playing, you see how they get better, and their team gets better through the season. So this is not rocket science. It's pretty basic stuff. Use the opportunity this summer to not have a huge drop off and to maintain some learning. Having said that, the first thing I said, of course, tonight was to say that childhood through adolescence is a time for having fun, and the summer is a time for having fun. And so I'm not suggesting anything more onerous than that. There's a couple of things I wanted to mention. The fact that the last day is Thursday. We have graduation coming up on Saturday for the 4 high schools, if you include MST. And just to mention it last week, to mention it again, high school is now at the Southern New Hampshire University Centre, the SNU Centre, the old Verizon Centre. And graduation is on Saturday the 15th. It's at 8 a.m. at the Manchester School of Technology. Graduation will be at 8 a.m. Central High School at 10 a.m. West High School at 2 p.m. and then Memorial High School at 6 p.m. And if you have a niece, a nephew, a brother, or sister, or whatever graduating, there is no restriction on the numbers. It's not like just mom and dad and immediate family. There's plenty of room at the Verizon Centre, so there's always room for friends, families, neighbours, etc. to go and support. So congratulations to the kids graduating from our high schools this weekend, and a great job of work done by Manchester's teachers once again. I'm looking at the Manchester School District website right now, and I'm reminded that a couple of there have been new principals appointed in the last week. 2 new principals, one to Weston and one to Beach Street. So you can go on the Manchester School District website and read about them. But I was impressed. I spent some time watching the interview of one of these ladies, and I was very impressed. So hopefully, they'll be very successful, etc. So moving on from there, as far as the actually MST class night is on right now at 6 p.m. over at there at that school, and etc. There's lots of other stuff on here. I don't want to bore you with all of it, but it's going on the Manchester School District website is a wonderful resource for people to find out some, or at least, of what's going on in the schools. I mean, sadly, it can't be all there. There's a hell of a lot going on, but there's certainly some of it there. And as I haven't mentioned for weeks and weeks here, the whole idea of the whole subject of Aspen, which is the student and parent interface. Getting on Aspen and seeing what you can see what your kids' results are. You can see their projects. You can see their exam scores. You can see all of that stuff is available through Aspen. So as a parent, especially as your kids get a little older, it's less important in elementary school because by the very nature of elementary school, and kids are pretty transparent and open anyway, and envelopes come home or messages come home from teachers, and they're not hidden or lost or whatever. As your kids grow older, I think it's more and more important. Their level of work becomes more difficult. though I don't think it's ever really difficult, but becomes more with greater requirements. And there's a requirement for parents and guardians to step up and actually take an interest. And so going on Aspen, instead of waiting to hear at the end of a quarter or the end of a semester that your son or daughter has a failing grade or a poor grade or is doing particularly badly in a particular subject, if you're in there on a weekly basis or something, you can see this stuff going on. And so Aspen ought to be the Bible, so to speak, for parents of kids in the Manchester School District. And so on to the one thing about I mentioned the soccer issue. Just you'll excuse me for being a soccer guy. I suppose most people who know me know I've been involved with soccer for a long time, and so. As schools come up come to a finish, there are lots of camps going on. Golf camps and soccer camps and basketball camps and baseball camps, etc. There's a soccer camp in Manchester called the British Are Coming Soccer Camp, which has been around for 27 years now. It's run in late July at Livingston Park. You can access the website at Manchester North Soccer League, so it's MNSL, Manchester North Soccer League. If you Google that, and you're able to go in and you can register your kids for that program, which is just a great program. The fact that it's been around for 27 years is evidence enough that it's such a wonderful thing. The other thing is that if you go on, and I commend Manchester Inkling for highlighting this in their pages today, but MPAL, the Manchester Police Athletic League, has a series of free programs on. Starting next week, I think it is. If I had my glasses, I could look and tell you. But they've got programs every day, Monday through Friday, and for ages 5 through 18. It's free for anybody who wants to do it, and they've got boxing, themed programming, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, lots of things going on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There's quite an extensive program that goes through. There's an evening program as well. On the other nights it finishes. Actually, Wednesday and Thursday night there's a 5:30 to 7:30 program. But during the day they have boxing for kids from 10 to 11:30 a.m. every morning at the Police Athletic League. So that's one of the many programs. And if you go to you can go to the Mayor's office, you go to the Office of Youth Services. There are places you go. Actually, probably the best place would be the library. If you go to the library, there's information about all the programs available, especially those programs that are free or very low cost, that are available for children and young adults in the city of Manchester, put on by various organisations, both public and private. And that information is, you go to the West Side Library, you go to the library on Pine Street, and that information is available. And you'd be amazed at the number of programs and things that are available for students. So there's no excuse really to be sitting around on the couch and getting up well into noontime and ending up looking like me, putting on pounds and being unfit. So I'd advise parents to get out there, get their kids out there, enjoy the summer, and do what you can. So on to the Alderman last night, the budget in the city of Manchester. As many of you will know, I've tried not to rail about it and shout and scream about it every night, but it bothers me that, and it should bother everybody, but it bothers me that we have teachers in the city of Manchester who have not had a contract for more than a year, and that in and of itself is bad enough. But the fact that this is it took a couple of years. They had just finished a 3-year contract, but there were 2 years before that they were without contract. And so for 3 out of the last 6 years, Manchester School District teachers and secretaries and support staff and paraprofessionals and everybody, administrators, principals, All of those are now without a contract, but the teachers have been without one for a year, and up until now there's been enough ink being written on the idea of impasse and negotiations, etc. I don't want to visit all of that here, but it's clear that to me that the city of Manchester hasn't taken seriously. It doesn't cherish its teachers, and it hasn't taken seriously the seriousness of the problem, and that's what disappoints me. And it's all fine to for each individual involved and people on the negotiation committees and etc., that each as an individual can sort of argue their standpoint and say, we've tried this and we've done that, and I don't want to. We could get lost in the weeds on that. The bottom line for me is I would like to go a layer behind that and say that the ultimate problem is, in my worldview, is that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen, and therefore the school committee, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen never had any funding in the budget to fund any, to pay for any new contract anyway. And so I don't want to say literally it's negotiating in bad faith. I think some people would say it is, but people feel constrained by the fact that the money's not in the budget, therefore I'll sit across the table from a bunch of from teacher representatives and I'll say let's see what we can do and see what we can hammer out. But oh, by the way, this is this red line is here that we can't cross. So now you end up with stupid conversations, in my view, about how, well, if teachers would give up this something on their benefit side, that would mean the city would have $1 million benefit from that, and then we could take that $1 million and pay you some salary increase. And so that's sort of this circular thinking is all a nonsense. And I was interested at the school board meeting 3 weeks ago when people like John Avard in particular, who spoke out very boldly and clearly that he thought that the tax cap was a problem, as the gentleman who had previously led the negotiations in the previous round 3 years ago for that contract. He said that he was during those negotiations he was constrained by the fact that that's how much money they had, and so that's all he could do. And then the current committee, at least, I don't want to misquote Committeeman LaHoo, but he certainly was in favour of putting the topic of the tax cap before the people. Now, I don't know exactly where Jimmy LaHoo stands on the topic of the tax cap. So I don't want to. There's a difference between saying, let's put the thing before the people and have the people decide. You could oppose the tax cap and still support the idea of having the tax cap put before the people. But it was interesting that members of the current negotiating committee were saying, let's get this thing out and have people decide on it, because I've described it in much more colourful language about how the tax cap is like having a boot on the neck of the school district and not allowing it to breathe. And so I'm very grateful that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen voted last night to override the budget. And then, quoting from, I'm back on Manchester Inklink here. I was looking for it I might have had it on Union Leader, but it's I've for some reason I've lost it. So another shout out to the people at Manchester Inklink. And so, and it's a wonderful resource, by the way. If you haven't been using it, Manchester Inc. Link.com does a wonderful job of covering the city news nowadays, and so kudos to them. But they have it on here today. And I'll give you a brief synopsis. It says, in her tax cap budget presented this spring, Mayor Craig allocated an additional $4.3 million to the Manchester School District, blah, 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 so which was the most funding to the district in 14 years. Now, this has been repeated by Mayor Craig numerous times, and she deserves credit for that. That is true. However, there's a caveat here. using the hard amount, the fact is that the tax cap number, the percent inflation, or CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was higher last year than it has been. You go back a decade, and ever since the 2008-9 debacle, with the crash of the economy, etc., there were, and this is one of the problems with our tax cap, is that we introduced a tax cap on the back of a period when growth and etc. was close to zero, and so we had years with 0.6%, etc. So when it came to an increase tied to such numbers, meant that the city had to live within these very tight, small amounts. So I want to give Mayor Craig due credit for introducing a tax cap budget, which he's required to do, which did allow for the $4.3 million to go to Manchester School District. But to be fair, it also fell within the tax cap, and so it just happens to be that the CPI number was higher. It doesn't account for all of it, but it accounts for a lot of that. Tonight, the Manchester Board of School Committee and Aldermen adopted the city's $353 million financial year 2020 budget, which included an additional $2.2 million to the Manchester School District for a total of $6.6 million. The financial year 2020 Aldermen's budget was approved with a veto-proof 10-4 vote. That required an override of the tax cap. After the passage of the budget, Mayor Craig released the following statement. She said, "When I presented my budget back in March, I said it was a starting point over the last few months. Alderman O'Neill, along with many aldermen, have worked on alternate budgets that built upon what I presented. This is not an easy process. I want to thank the aldermen for working hard, coming up with a budget that addresses the city needs. No budget is perfect. What is most important is that we found common ground. When I presented my budget this spring, I allocated $4.3 million increase. Again, the largest increase of funding in 14 years. Yep. The budget passed tonight increases funding to schools even further, with an additional $2,276,045 being appropriated. I'm hopeful that this increase will help get us toward a timely resolution to contracts with our teachers and other educators." To finish Mayor Craig's letter, she says, "Our educators deserve a fair contract." They absolutely do. "And I'm committed, along with many of my colleagues, to finding a resolution as soon as possible. I look forward to working with this board, the school board, department heads, and our employees to use the funds allocated in this budget to make our city, our school district, and our community stronger." So that's the end of her note. The key vote sending more money to schools was the 10-4 vote. In favour were Alderman Kevin Kavanagh, Will Stewart, Tim Baines, Chris Herbert, Tony Sapienza, Bill Shea, Barbara Shaw, Bill Barry, Norman Gamache, and Dan O'Neill. Opposed were Alderman Keith Hirschman, Elizabeth Moreau, John Cataldo, and Joe Kelly-Levasseur. Kudos to them. I don't understand, measures Hirschman, Moreau, Cataldo, and Levasseur, who voted against the tax cap. I think that ideologically they're opposed to the tax cap. I understand that, but politics, I think, requires something more than simple ideology. And when your little ideological, book that tells you, how you have to think, clashes with realism, reality, fairness, and morality, then you need to take your little red book of doctrine and ideology and push it off to one side. It's not the same as being unprincipled, etc. The principled thing for a public representative to do, I think, is to act responsibly. Now, I know that people like Alderman Hirschman and Levasseur and the others, Moreau and Cataldo, would make strong arguments, I'm sure, that they think that to them the idea of the tax cap supersedes everything else. And I leave them to. I don't want to put words in their mouth. I leave them to make their arguments. But I think when it's clear that the results of a certain policy are go against fairness and what is right, and not alone that, I would make the argument that that policy is actually doing damage to the city, then it behooves people to be braver and to step up and make the right decision. Under the Alderman's budget, again, it says provides the largest increase in funding to schools since 2006, a total of 6.6 million. Great. Here's your. I don't want to be mean spirited, but great. I'm happy. But let's be clear. The least well-funded school system in the state, the highest number of pupils per teacher in the state, a system that's at least $50 million behind where it ought to be. What this number represents is the money it's going to take to actually do the things in the school. Nothing new and fancy. This money isn't going to hire a whole load of new teachers. This money is going to. We're not going to do anything about the $40 to $50 million backlog of maintenance and repair on the buildings and facilities of the school district. Just the school district, not the whole city. Roofs, ceilings, walls, bathrooms, etc. It will do little to solve that problem. It's not going to put the resources into our schools that are required for the programs we need for various things. Caveat, of course, we'll have to see what the school board decides. The school board is given an amount of money. The school board, with the new superintendent, will decide how that money is allocated. But when you look at the number of teachers and support staff, etc., there's about 2,100 people, 2,100 people in our school district. And as I pointed out a few weeks back, if everybody were to get $1,000 increase per year, which is a $20 a week increase, I want to go into the whole steps again and all that stuff, but just simply a $20 per week increase per person, then that a $20 per week, $1,000 per year becomes $2.1 million. So the additional money that the Board of Mayor and Aldermen went to add to the school budget is enough to give across the board, if it were to be divided evenly across everybody, a pay increase of about $20 a week or 50 cents an hour. So yeah, it's great. I'm grateful for it. But am I dancing up and down and going? We've crossed the Rubicon. We've reached a new day. Manchester has decided that it's going to modernize its schools and introduce computers into its system and add security to our buildings and introduce STEM programs and gifted and talented programs and reading ready programs, and it's going to add social workers and speech therapists and physiotherapists and child psychologists, and all of a sudden the school district will have the things that lots of other school districts have, and maybe we'll have an athletic director and assistant athletic directors, maybe we'll have a director of arts and sciences, a director of the classics. None of that's going to happen, folks. So just everybody hold on to their seat. Whether you're dancing up and down on one side of this equation going, isn't it great the Alderman did something, or you're dancing up and down the other side saying, what the hell are they doing? I don't want to spend a dime more. I like being the cheapest taxpayers in the state. Whichever side of that equation you're on, this is great, but I know some of my friends in the Aldermanic board won't be happy to hear it, but This is just treading water. It's good because it means the rot is stopped for 1 year, but it's just treading water. It'll be interesting to see where it comes out in the wash. So it provides funding. So $6.6 million for the schools provides funding for potential agreements with the employees with outstanding contracts subject to negotiations, etc., etc. And that also applies to the police, who have a contract upcoming. The fact is, the realpolitik of it, ladies and gentlemen, is that we were told at public meetings and the Board of Mayor and Aldermen have been told, and the school board has been told, that our principals are writing letters of of recommendation for experienced staff who are walking out of our school district. They've had enough. They're done with it. They're getting paid. They can go down the street 5 miles, 10 miles, and earn $10,000 or $20,000 a year more for doing exactly the same job for less kids. And just think about it. If your wife or your husband was working in a job in Manchester and loved his job or her job in Manchester, and you knew that if he moved to, some town 5 miles away, that he could put $400 extra in his pocket or $200 extra in his pocket every week, how happy would you be sitting around saying, yeah, well, maybe we can't afford to take the kids to Disney this year, or maybe we can't afford to put, to buy steak at the end of the month and have a meal, or maybe we can't have Granny and Granddad over for a meal on Sunday night because we can't afford it because, you want to continue to work in the City of Manchester school districts district, knowing you could be paid more elsewhere. So that's the kind of reality that it's great that our aldermen have actually done what they've done. But let's put it in perspective. There's a reason why they have to do it. They've been dragged there screaming. We didn't get here in 1 year. I don't expect to solve it in 1 year. So I don't want to be a naysayer, but let's not get excited. The bottom line is we're $50 million a year behind where we really ought to be. This is an incremental step, a tiny one. What I will do on the city side, which always seems to do okay from these things. So we'll see new positions at the health department for substance misuse and a mental health coordinator. I think probably a good idea given our circumstances. It includes a city match of $30,000 for new homelessness services coordinator in the health department. So, we're talking about $370 million budget, but we're pulling $30,000 out of it to talk about the homeless services coordinator, which I suppose is okay. Includes funding for all existing collective bargaining contracts and salary agreements. That's on the city side. It funds the financial year 20 road plan for $4.5 million, which will result in 50 miles of streets receiving upgrades or treatments over the next year. Now, I think that's an important thing, and our aldermen do deserve great credit for this. Because remember, not to pick on my old friend Mayor Gatsis, but I was very clear, and I spoke on this program a number of times on the idea of bonding the money to pay for tarring and paving our roads 2 years ago. I thought this is like, taking out a HELO or a real estate loan on your house, a second mortgage, to wallpaper the living room, or to put new carpet in the bedroom. Those are not capital improvements. Or worse still, it might be more like, doing something even more temporary. So the idea that we're still paying for, by the way, the Gatsis administration spending, borrowing $5 million or whatever it was, $4.5 million to pave our roads 2 years ago is just a sleight of hand, so that you're able to sit there and run for executive councillor, having said, I didn't pass a budget, or I didn't propose a budget that broke the tax cap. No, you didn't, because you took $4.5 million that the city actually needed to fix the potholes, and you took it and you borrowed money out of our children's future to pay for it. So at least our aldermen all of them deserve great credit for putting $4.5 million in the budget and actually paying for the pothole repairs and the paving of our roads this year from this year's revenue, and not lying to the people or conning the people by pretending to be, that you can make magic, that you can, do the miracle of the loaves and fishes with the city budget. So I'm very pleased about that. It provides $2.8 million for homelessness prevention and affordable housing. I don't know how those two numbers break out, but clearly the homeless problem, and I think that's kind of a misnomer. There are two different problems here. There's the issue, I think, of vagrancy on the streets of Manchester, which, by the way, is markedly improved in the last month or two since Chief Capano has put has put additional police walking the streets of Manchester for longer hours and double the number. And you'll see there's a real difference when you drive around the street. There are the panhandlers. Are less frequent than they were. They're not in as many places as they were, and the people dossing and hanging out on Elm Street are hugely reduced. The problem's not all fixed, but that has certainly been an improvement. And I think there's the issue of homelessness, which is a real issue that we all ought to be concerned about and compassionate about, and as a society own it and try to find a resolution for it. So I'm glad to see that there's money there for affordable housing, and it'll be interesting to see how that is. But the fact that out of a budget of close to $380 million, that we're finding $2.8 million in there to actually spend money on homelessness prevention and affordable housing, I think is a good thing, and I applaud the Board of Mayor and Aldermen for that also. It also invests $550,000 in improving the city sidewalks. Absolutely, Manchester is a growing city, an exciting city with lots of wonderful developments going on and all over the place. It's incredible, actually, the level of, and there's more to come. I think it's we're on the threshold of a of even more. But there's a lot of construction going on in the tightly around the downtown area as we speak, and I enumerated it some weeks ago. So $550,000 for improving city sidewalks, I think will be people will be excited about that. We'll have 1.65 million, 1,650,000 in improving city parks. Again, money that's badly needed. The Parks Department is doing Trojan work. I saw, and I mentioned here actually last year, there's a number for the number of trees in Manchester, and we have one tree person with a helper who has to manage those trees. So when there's a storm, they fall down. They just have to be cut up and repaired and whatever. But when that isn't happening, there are dangerous trees. They're just managing that set of trees is more than. The math doesn't work. The poor people working there have far more to do than they possibly could get done. So that department clearly isn't sufficient. It's not built for purpose to actually manage the parks in the city as it is, on the tree side at least. So anything that can go there is there. But when you've got years of having your boot on the neck of the city and refusing to fund things, and every year saying to the departments, come back to me with a 2% decrease. Okay, yeah, come back to me with a 2% decrease. And oh, by the way, you'll get fired if you don't. So come back to me with a 2% decrease. Eventually, those 2% decreases actually matter. And politicians who want to swan around the city, talking about how they've been fiscally conservative, on the backs of programs that are not funded and things that are not done. So there's a reality. You get what you pay for in the end. There are no mysteries, folks. I don't think there's anybody has got special sauce that their policy is, their way of doing things is so much better than this person's way of doing things. There's some truth to that. There are efficiencies. There are savings that can be had. But in the end, if you want to buy a 4-bedroomed house, it costs more than buying a 2-bedroomed house. And if you need a 4-bedroom house, you can manage in a 2-bedroom house. But guess what? Mom and dad are in one room and the 4 kids, mixed genders, are in the other room, and it doesn't always work. Now, in some cases you say, we have to make it work. That's all we can do. Well, that's the attitude of some. But if clearly you need a 4-bedroom house, then the responsible thing to do is to see if there's a way of having a 4-bedroom house that everybody can enjoy and have the quality of life that goes with it, if that's what you require. Back to this. So invest that in city parks. Then provides funding for body cameras for all police officers, which I think is a trend in America, and we're seeing more and more of it. There's been controversy about cameras in Manchester today, so we'll go back to that if we can. It provides $500,000 to stormwater infrastructure projects to address flooding issues in the city. So this is so there are areas in the city where streets flood, etc., or areas flood. One of them was on Maple Street near Webster, where I think $1.5 million worth of work or something was done in the last year. But there's another issue. I was at a meeting about 3 or 4 months ago, and it's a meeting of the Merrimack River Watershed Authority or Watershed group or whatever it is. But at that meeting, there were people there from every town from Newburyport up through Lawrence and Lowell, Nashua, up through and up to Concord, and all the smaller towns in between, down in northern Massachusetts, etc. And the meeting moves around geographically, and their meeting was actually held in Manchester about 4 or 5 months ago. And I was embarrassed when they put the I was embarrassed, first of all, that there was nobody there officially representing Manchester, even though there was supposed to have been, but they didn't show up. And it was said at the meeting, by the way, the president of the group said that they'd been promised that representatives from the city of Manchester would attend, but they never did, to a meeting about the health of the Merrimack River that was being held in Manchester. But anyway, they put up graphs on the slides, on a slide presentation at the time, and they talked about one of the big problems with the health of the Merrimack River. While it had vastly improved over time, that there were still major contributors to pollution of the Merrimack River, and one of the issues of pollution was storm runoff, and so when you have major rainstorms, if your drains from your streets, if that water goes into your sewage system and is not separated, and in Manchester we've been working on separating those two things, and that work goes on. It's been going on for years now. But when it rains and there's a heavy rain, the sewage system can't handle the level of water, so it goes out and it overflows and flows into the Merrimack River. And if you drive down the west side of this highway and you drive down 293 during or after a storm, you'll see those massive, sprouts of water coming out from what look like big, car-sized holes in the brickwork on the opposite side of the river, and that's storm water coming out into the Merrimack River. Well, it's actually coming out it's the overflow from the sewage system, so it's bringing the dirt off the streets and the sewage system out into the river. So the fact is, at this meeting I was at, it said that the city with the largest contribution to stormwater runoff into the Merrimack River was the city of Manchester. That Nashua, Concord, Nashua, Lowell, Lawrence, Haverhill, etc., the other towns down the river they showed their improvement over time. And while Manchester has improved, let's not make, it's not like we're not working on it. But why is it that we're behind? So I was embarrassed by that. I thought we would have done better. So $500,000 for stormwater infrastructure is a good thing. $3.5 million to fund mechanical equipment replacement program. I have no idea what that is, other than I presume it's to replace mechanical equipment, which might include automobiles or trucks or whatever, and other mechanical equipment. It's just smart stuff, ladies and gentlemen. Given if we take the schools as an example, that's exactly what we haven't been doing in the schools generally, is acquiring, doing a capital expenditure and then maintaining it over time, and also putting contingency funds in place so that, if you spend $1 million on something in 2010 and it has a life of 10 years, you need $100,000 a year for the following 10 years till 2020, so you have the $1 million to go buy its replacement after the 10 years. That's how business operates, but Manchester doesn't always do that. So fully funds rehabilitation of the Queen City Bridge, which will bring in $7.6 million in state funds. So just again, smart funding where you're getting matching state funds. It's leaving money on the table not to do it. And we've done that too often in the past. So there are a lot of good things that we can talk about in this budget. It fully funds the summer reading program, which I mentioned earlier. It funds professional development for city staff. I think generally speaking, training and development are important in any group, and certainly on the school side it should be. Hopefully the school budget will find, the school board will find some money for professional development for teachers in the new budget. Includes funding for the Southern New Hampshire Planning Commission. Again, an important organization. That's a small amount of money. I don't remember the exact amount, but it's in the few thousand number. Includes $5,000 in funding for the Arts Commission, which is great. I think $5,000 for the Arts Commission is great, but I just question I support that fully. Maybe the Arts Commission should get 50 and not 5. But when you're talking about $380 million, why would you, on a list of maybe 15 items, why would you pull out the Arts Commission and say, we're giving money to the arts? So why? So that people can go, oh, the arts, we don't need arts in this, whatever. I just seem it's strange to go into such minutiae. Where are we? Includes funding to staff a fire ladder truck on the west side. Why there isn't a staffed fire ladder truck on the west side in the beginning, I just don't know. But it's good that it's been funded. I presume it was required by or asked for by Chief Goonan, and now it's being funded. It fully funds 2 new customer service reps in the tax collector's office to reduce wait times. Now, this was promised last year, and there are additional funds have come into the city. Again, I think car registrations were up by $2 million this year, and so it is. All of us who drive cars know we have to go into City Hall and register our vehicles, and we all know that there are lines there most days that if it was a Hannaford's supermarket, we'd simply leave our groceries behind and go buy them someplace else. And the reason why people stand in that sometimes onto the corridor on the tax collector's office, we're there to collect registration fees and motor vehicle fees. It's been those numbers have come in over budget for year after year after year now, and it just seems like a common sense thing to do. When you're making that much money and bringing that much money in, to allow citizens to not spend an hour waiting to give you their hard-earned money. So I'm very glad that that's happening. It's a common sense thing. It fully funds new DV prosecutor and juvenile prosecutor positions. If I recollect correctly, what that will do is it will free up Manchester Police Department personnel who have been doing the juvenile prosecution piece. And so, as I recall, I think that's the case with that. Then it adds funding for 2 new positions in the assessor's office, which again goes to those positions should be self-funding. In adding personnel to the assessor's office. It includes an increase in non-property tax revenues of $3.8 million, primarily due to the increase in motor vehicle registrations. So if you look at the increase in non-property tax revenues is $3.8 million. And an important part about when you think about this budgeting process is that because of the tax cap, Manchester cannot actually use, other than using an override like we've done here, we can't actually use the additional money. So we get $3.8 million because things are going well. These are good times. We get $3.8 million in revenue in the city, and the tax cap says, but you can't spend it on city services. Sorry, you gotta give that back to the people. You gotta reduce. In other places. This money you can't just use it because we have a tax cap. We actually have a spending cap. So even if we took in $38 million more rather than $3.8 million more, we still couldn't go and reduce the number of kids in the classes because, hey, that's Manchester and we have a tax cap, and that's how we go here. And then it funds building upgrades in the tax collector's office, the planning and community development department, the assessor's office, human resources, and solicitor's offices. So there's a bunch of these. What those upgrades are, I don't know. But it always has bothered me that when I look at the needs requirement on the school side, I'm sure that smart people at City Hall have made smart decisions, and nobody's putting gold leafed covered desks in the office there, but. It has always bothered me that we have a process on the school side for replacing or replenishing, renewing or acquiring new the things that are needed on the capital side, and on the building side, and on the maintenance side, and the whole process is one of paring it down to a point of not being not being useful and not really responding to the need. Because we always start with, we've got this amount of money and now we're going to squeeze our requirement into that. And that's bad enough, but then when we do it and we actually squeeze it out through the far end, we then feel self-satisfied that we actually funded our requirement. I've said many times, I'd be fine with, I wouldn't actually be fine with it, but it's a much different thing to say that we fully funded the requirement, which was 5% of the actual requirement we had that we thought about, and we got down to it and we decided that this was the most important, thinnest edge of the wedge, and that's what we're funding. And we're letting the rest go to rot, but we want to congratulate ourselves that we've funded this little piece. So there's a lot of work to be done, I think, in the city generally, but in the school district more importantly. We'll see what, with the new superintendent, we'll see what he brings to the table. Interestingly, Utah is the state with where he has come from, is the state with the lowest spending per pupil in the United States. So that's a contrast to usually the situation here. So we'll see what he brings to the table. It'll be interesting to see what the school board members do with their budget. It'll be interesting to see if we can convince our great teachers to actually stay in our district, and that at least they can expect now, rightfully, to have an agreement to have a new contract and to make up some of the ground that they've lost, that at least the slide will stop under this budget. And despite what I've said and some of the things I've said about this is not, certainly not perfect, but is not everything, I am grateful to the board of mayor and aldermen to, at least on this occasion, stop the rot and do what is right by the City of Manchester, or at least approach that. To do what is right would be to fund the schools properly, of course. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to leave you with that tonight. I hope you have a wonderful summer, those of you who will be heading off, and congratulations to all our children, young, old, and in between, who've been working hard all year, and take a rightful break. And parents, get ready to have fun with those kids, and I'll see you again next week. Good night now from Jim O'Connell.